Hello. Now that we have built an activity and um, implemented the persistent UI states using bundle as well as view models, the next thing is, of course, uh, creating the second activity in the app and connecting from this activity to that. To learn about those, we will have to learn about intents. Intents is a mechanism in Android to pass data between different app components, like to activities or from an activity to a service and so on. So in today's video, we'll look at what is an intent, what are intent filters, then the two types of intents, explicit and implicit, and then how to start another activity and how to pass data between the activities. So we'll extend our dice games app to go from the wallet where we simply click the die and earn coins if we hit a 6. We'll create a new. We'll actually create a game. It's a Japanese gambling dice game called Shohan, which, well, I'll explain it as we get there. Okay, but the idea here is create the activity for that game, and from our wallet activity, launch that game and pass the amount that you have in your wallet to the Chohan activity. Okay, so that's what we'll do here. Okay. All right, as usual, some recommended readings, basically from the official guides. So on intents and intent filters, this first page gives a good information background on what they are, how to use them, and then this is the reference on intent. So what methods so you can call an intent and so on. So what is an intent? Um, First of all, let's try to understand why we need intents. So recall each Android application runs in its own sandbox. So each process is run separately, and there is no straightforward way for one activity to one app to communicate with another, which is a good thing for security reasons. So you don't want a random malicious app on your phone to, for example, go and um, interact with your banking app or some other important application that you also have on your phone, right? Or just randomly pull up all your photos and share them in weird situations or with weird people. So that's the basic mechanism of Android. But then the question is, sometimes there are meaningful interactions between activities. For example, you want to click a photo and share it on your Instagram or some other social media profile. So how does the camera app communicate with the Instagram app, right? So what is the mechanism for that? Um, and once again, remember the Android components, all of them are very loosely coupled. So in a sense, each activity, for example, is independent. And similarly about um, other things as well. So a service, a background service for say a music player or for downloading a file over the internet or uploading your photo, all of them are independent of the activity that really launched it and so on, right? So let's consider two examples. Um, yeah, so like the one I just said, how do you pass a selfie or a photo from your camera app to the social media app? And so this is an example of interaction across applications. Now there is interaction within applications. So um, on the inbox activity of say your email app, you find an email address, you click on that and you expect the compose activity to open with that email address in the to box, right? In the senders as the sender. So how is that email address communicated from the inbox activity to the compose activity? Should the mechanism for these two be different, uh, or should it be same? So the answer is, well, I mean, it is different, but it is also same, as we'll see pretty soon. Okay. So intent is Android's mechanism to basically support communication like this, a communication between different app components. And the app components could be activities, the ones we have seen so far, In a few days, we'll go and look at services, broadcast receivers, and content providers. Okay? So services, as the name indicates, is a background component. It runs behind the screens, and it can let you do things like download a file, upload a file, or play a music file behind the screen. So where you don't need the activity to be on, and even if the music player app goes to the background, the music should continue to play. So you can check your email or browse net or do something else while listening to the music. So such things are services. Broadcast receivers, again, as the name indicates, is basically a system-wide message. For example, um, say the device has started charging, or the device is in now airplane mode and things like that. And then different apps, um, you know, um, so all the apps will receive the broadcast, and they will act accordingly. So some apps may show your current battery status. Some other app may want to uh, resume downloading, which it had halted to conserve battery power, and so on. And content providers are also the fourth type of component, which again, as the name suggests, they deal with uh, handling different data or content. Yeah, we'll come to the rest three of them in due course. But yeah, so intents are essentially asynchronous messages used to communicate between these components, and the components can be in the same application, like in that example of the email app, or across applications, like in the example of the camera app to the Instagram app. Okay. All right. So what are the common uses of intents? There are three common scenarios. First is starting another activity. So you have two methods, start activity or start activity for result, and they take intent and some other parameters to start them. Um, the second is with the broadcast receiver. So delivering a broadcast, I just discussed what broadcast is. So, you can, so systems can create their own broadcasts, but you can also create a broadcast depending on what type of app you are building. So, it could be a phone related, message related app, which you perhaps want to send some message to all the other apps, and you can create your own broadcast and again send a broadcast using an intent. Um, and the third application is starting the service. So now a small caveat here. So before API 21, that is API 20 and below, there used to be a sort of a similar method, start service, that would take an intent as a parameter. Now they have changed the mechanism, but we'll look at both when we go to services. Yeah, these are the three common ways of using intent. All right. Moving on, how do you describe an intent? So there are different parameters or description metrics of an intent. Um, so the first one is action. You describe what action should be taken by the component that is going to handle this intent. So actions are usually, verb words like send uh, or such things. And send here in most cases would mean send a text or a media message. So you can create an intent and add the action on that, or create an intent with the action. The next one is type. So if you are sending some message, you may want to explicitly mention its MIME type, like the plain text, or as it says here, the panorama view picture in the JPEG format. And there are, of course, several such other types that you can mention. The third one is a category. So category describes where and how the intent should be used. The action, in fact, we have seen an example of intent filters with an action and a category. If you remember in our manifest file, the main activity or main activity in the greetings app or the wallet activity in the current dice games app has action main and category launcher. So that's where it's specifying, where and how it should be used. So category launcher, as we have seen, make sure it's put on the launcher of the device. Icon of the activity is put on the launcher of the device, and clicking that opens it up. Okay. The next thing is component. So sometimes you may want to specify the exact activity or service, etc., which should handle this particular intent. So, if you have access to the full package or class path name, then you can just specify that, and the intent will be handled by that particular component. Um, and the next thing is data. Data is in the form of a URI, and you can pass different type of data. Like in this case, you are sending the first contact in the contacts database in the backend to be handled. So there are such examples. A URL, a web address, could also be a data as another example. And finally, you have extras, which is basically a bundle that can carry specific information like ints, as we have seen when persisting the UI state using bundles. So a key point here is, with the flexibility that Android provides, none of these, no one of these is actually mandatory when creating an intent. You can choose to specify an intent or describe an intent with one or more of these, and it could be any of those. But as we'll see with some examples soon, some of them, they kind of pair up or they go together. For example, the action main and category launcher, as we have already seen in the greetings as well as the Dice Games app. Okay, so the next thing associated with this is on the other side. So you create and describe an intent in one of the components, for example, the activity that wants to launch this intent. And on the other side, the receiver has what's called an intent filter to filter out or rather filter in uh, the appropriate intent so the component can handle it. And again, we have seen examples of this, but let's take another look. So this intent filter is declared in an app's manifest file for each component. So if your app has 10 activities, let's say, and 3 services, each of them should declare an intent filter. Of course, if it's going to handle that particular kind of intent. If it's not, then you can leave it empty. So far, we have seen an example like this. So you have the wallet activity in the Dice Games app, which has the name main and the category, which has the action main and the category launcher. So the action main here says this is the app's main entry point. This is what the developer wants to launch when the user clicks the app's icon on the launcher or the shortcut on the home screen. Okay, and then the launcher itself specifies that the activities icon should be placed on the launcher of the device. So these two actually go together to make sure the icon is placed on the launcher. So we have seen this example already. This is the intent filter. And all the activities who have this intent filter, their icons are placed on the launcher. So if you go to a device screen, all the icons you see there are there because of the fact that those activities have this particular intent filter. So, and this is an example of the two pairing up together. Okay. Here is another example. Let's say you have an activity which wants to handle sending messages. So let's call it message activity. Okay. What you see here, you see the name send, and that tells us that this activity wants to deliver some data to someone else. Now, that is very vague, but that is deliberately that vague. Um, so any kind of sending data from this, any kind of sending data from here to there can be, is handled by this particular action. And then you can specify what that data is using some of the other descriptors. In this case, we have the MIME type, which says it's a plain text. So now this activity is going to handle only the text messages. Now, what is default? Default, an activity that wants to handle that wants to handle invoking from other components, unless it's an explicit intent. So meaning, if an activity wants to handle an implicit intent, it must specify default. I know we have not talked yet about explicit and implicit intents. That's actually on the very next slide. So perhaps it will be more clear there. But for now, um, what you can take away from this slide is any activity that wants to be invoked from anywhere else on the device. So if it wants to allow any activity, any app on the device to invoke it for some purpose, like sending a text message here, it must include this category default in its intent filters. Yeah. Now let's again look at this message activity. It is possible to get to the message activity from inside the app in which it is specified. For example, it could be a messenger like, say, WhatsApp or some other messenger which handles text messages. So what is happening here is you could go from its home screen and select a particular contact, and then go to this message activity and send the message to this contact, to that particular contact, right? But it is also possible to get here from anywhere else. So let's say you are you are on a browser, and you want to share the link as a plain text with your friends. So through the share button, you will see this particular activities icon because it has this particular intent filter. Okay, so that is uh, essentially what the implicit intent does. It lets you select one of the candidate activities to handle that particular action. Okay, all right. Now let's look at these two different types of intents, explicit and implicit. Explicit, as the name suggests, lets you directly specify the target app's package name or the class name of the component itself. So if you know that, which you will inside your own app, you can just specify that particular component's name and launch that specific component, for example, the activity. But if you don't know that, which is the case with almost all other apps that you have not developed, or those are not open source, you would have to use something else. So explicit intents basically specify the exact component, like an activity, to handle this particular intent. And an implicit intent is where you declare a general description or general thing that you want to perform, and then you let the OS figure out what are the best candidates to do it, and then you get to choose which activity you want to handle it from. Of course, you can set a default, so it always goes to a particular specific activity or component, but in general, that is the mechanism. Okay, so in an implicit intent, you would say things like, um, I want to share this photo as a multimedia type. And then um, Android OS will figure out what activities currently installed on this device can handle that particular action. Okay, so, and then it will let you choose from those. So that's the idea here. Now, declaring an intent filter, like we saw 2 slides back, allows that component to handle implicit intents. On the other hand, if you don't declare an intent filter, it basically means you can invoke that component only through an explicit intent. So that is the dichotomy. Let's quickly look at how to handle intents, how the mechanism is before proceeding further. Okay. So yeah, here, this is a UML sequence diagram for activities, two activities, and then the activity manager is inside the OS as we know. So let's say activity one wants to invoke, or it wants to invoke the activity two. Whether it knows about activity two or not, it will call this method start activity and pass it intent and perhaps some other parameters. This message goes to the activity manager on the OS. Okay. There, it tries to figure out what is the target activity or target activities for this particular intent, using the intent filter declaration in the manifest files of all the apps installed on the device. Okay. Of course, if it's an explicit intent where the intent says, I want to launch activity2.class exactly, then it doesn't have to do this. But assuming that's not the case, it then figures out what are the candidate activities for this particular intent, that action or that um, data type component, category, etc. And when it identifies it, it calls the onCreate method on the activity2 um, after figuring out that this is the right candidate activity. Okay. If there are more than one of those, it gives you a pop-up to select the activity2 or say activity2 prime, all the candidates for that, and then the user selects it and you go from there, right? So that's the main idea here. Okay, so we'll pause here, and in the next video we'll talk about the idea of our second activity, how to create that, and so on. Okay. Thank you.